Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I notice that we're struggling a little bit on inverse operations and solving for x with the trig function, so I decided I'll make my own video for this section and upload it. Maybe, hopefully that could help you out a little bit and answer some of your questions a little bit more in more detail and with some more color and things like that. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to elaborate a little bit more. So here's an example problem that we're going to be working with here. Our goal is to solve for x. We want to find out what is this side length from top to bottom. Here's in this angle. We're given a reference angle, which in this case is 15 degrees, and we're given a hypotenuse, which is 34. The first thing I always recommend you do is to label everything. So from the reference angle, this 15, the x is in the opposite position. So I label it opposite. From this reference angle, 34 is in the hypotenuse. So I label that the hypotenuse. There's nothing in the adjacent, so I'm not even going to label it anything since there's nothing in the adjacent. So I have an opposite and a hypotenuse. Since we have an opposite and a hypotenuse, we're going to use sine of x. Every single time you have an opposite and a hypotenuse, you use sine of x. If you have an adjacent and a hypotenuse, you use cosine of x. If you have an opposite and an adjacent, you use tangent of x. But we have an opposite and a hypotenuse, so we use sine of x. So what we do, sine of 15. Well, we do sine of the reference angle. That's what that 15 is. So we take our reference angle is, whatever our number is, 15 in this problem, we put 15 in there. So we do sine of 15 is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. Now, anytime we have this set up where the x is on top in the fraction, all we got to do is just multiply the denominator times the sine function of 15. So you just multiply these two. So you do the denominator times the trig function of the reference angle. You multiply the two of them together and you're going to get your answer. This is the side length, 8.799847533, or x equals 8.8. That's the height of the opposite. So anytime you have an x in the numerator, all you got to do is multiply the denominator times the trig function of the reference angle. Multiply those two together. Whether it be sine, cosine, or tangent, you just have to multiply them together. So let's do one with a cosine. So we got our same setup here. Let's solve for x. Now our reference angle in this problem is 25 degrees. Our x is in the adjacent, so I label it adjacent. The 12 is in a hypotenuse, so I label that hypotenuse. There's nothing here in the opposite, so we're using adjacent and hypotenuse. Since we're using adjacent and hypotenuse, we use cosine. Since we have an adjacent and hypotenuse, we're going to use cosine of x. So now cosine of your reference angle, which is 25 degrees, is equal to adjacent divided by hypotenuse. Now since x is on top, you just multiply these two together. So 12 times cosine of 25, and you're going to get 10.875 blah 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 blah, which rounds to 10.9. Alright, let's do one with the tangent. So we have our same setup here. Our reference angle is down here in the corner. So from our reference angle, we have an opposite. That's where our x is, so we label it opposite. There's something in there. Then our 16 is in our adjacent, and nothing is in our hypotenuse. So opposite and adjacent, when we have an opposite and adjacent, we're going to use tangent of x. So tangent of my reference angle, 32 degrees, is equal to x divided by 16. Opposite divided by adjacent. Since x is in the numerator, we multiply these two, 16 times tangent of 32, and we get 9.9979. Now remember, tangent is always opposite divided by adjacent. Sine of x is always opposite divided by hypotenuse. Cosine of x is always adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And tangent is always opposite divided by adjacent. Alright, let's do another three problems here where it's kind of reversed when the x is on the bottom. So I'll walk you through from top to bottom. So our directions are to let's solve for x. We're going to find this side length. 34 is our reference angle. Our 18 is in our opposite, so I label it opposite. Our x is in our adjacent, so I label that adjacent. And there's nothing in the hypotenuse, so I just leave it alone. We have opposite and adjacent. When you have an opposite and an adjacent, you use tangent. So that's why I do tangent of my reference angle of 34 degrees is equal to opposite 18 divided by adjacent, which is x. Now when you have an x on the bottom, ideally you're flip-flopping the x and the tangent of 34. You're going to be flip-flopping those two in locations. Or in other words, what you got to do, when your x is on bottom, you just do your numerator, whatever number in the numerator is, divided by the trig function. So 18 divided by tangent of 34. And we know this for a fact, and it will always work because it's just inverse operations. So 18 divided by tangent of 34, that gets you 26.68, so on and so forth, which is rounded to 26.7. Let's do one with cosine here. So now, same setup. Let's solve for x. Our x is going to be in the bottom. We first label things according to our reference angle 34. 18 is in my adjacent. X is in my hypotenuse. So we have adjacent hypotenuse, so we got to use cosine. Our reference angle is 34, so cosine of 34 degrees is equal to 18 divided by x. Since x is on bottom, we do our numerator divided by the trig function of the reference angle, so 18 divided by cosine of 34, and we get 21.711. Remember, your calculator needs to be in degrees for all of this to work. To get the same answers, your calculators must be in degrees. Last one. Let's talk about sine here. So our reference angle is 34 degrees. Our opposite is 18. We have nothing in the adjacent, so we don't label anything. And then our x is in our hypotenuse, so we have an opposite in our hypotenuse. When we have an opposite and a hypotenuse, we use sine of x. So sine of 34 degrees, sine of my reference angle, is equal to opposite of 18 divided by the hypotenuse, which is x in this case. Now anytime you have x in the bottom, you take your numerator, 18, divided by your trig function, sine of 34. So 18 divided by sine of 34 will get you 32.189 ... which is the same thing as 32.2 when you round it to the nearest tenths place. Alright, hopefully this helps you out a little bit. If you have any questions, email myself or the special ed teacher to help you out. Or come to Extra Help. I'll be happy to help you out then. Alright, have yourself a good day. Bye-bye.